conversation with Thriving with Real. I'm Dr. Jada Moore Ruffin. You can call me Dr. Jada, though. That's a mouthful, right? I'm your weight loss and wellness expert, physician, coach, speaker, best-selling author, and entrepreneur. I help high achieving and results driven women to not only weigh less, but to further your personal success so that you not only look great, but you feel better and you live life at your best. Today, we are accompanied with none other than Janae Hicks. Janae Hicks is a gem. She is she's a mouthpiece for self-care, for empowerment, for wonderment, curiosity, taking a stand, and all the things that are related to you thriving. So it's very appropriate that we have this topic tonight. And she's helping you, me, us. We're all thriving with real. I'll let Janae do her introduction. And as she moves forward tonight, I want to give you an opportunity to invite anyone that you know to this conversation because it is going to be juicy and you want to be here doing it in person if you can. Of course, if you're watching the replay, we'll make sure you don't miss anything. There will be some assignments, some homework, some insights some revelations afterwards. So make sure that you stay tuned. Go ahead and save us as a contact in your emails so that they don't go to your spam box because this is live and this is all the way live. I want you to know that this is content that people pay for. And we come to you tonight as a service to you, for us to be in service with you in your own breakthroughs, in your own healing, in your own evolution. So thank you again, Janae, for being here tonight. I'll let you take it away. And if I understand it correctly, there were a few people who wanted to get a little bit of a recap from last session where we talked about surviving the holidays and boundary setting. So I'm going to let you take it away. 1, 2, 3, go, Janae. Woo! Let's light up the chat and invite Janae in. A warm welcome. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's go, Janae.
I know, Dr. J, that was a great welcome at 7:02 on a Wednesday because it is hump day and I can only imagine that we're all feeling that it is Wednesday. So thank you all for giving me your evening and being here while we thrive with Real. So I'm super happy to be back with you all this evening. I'm going to jump right into it. My goal in this work specifically tonight is that we understand the inner critic differently. I want to have a more adaptive relationship with this inner dialogue. I want you to begin with a lens, with a frame that says, how does your inner critic affect your life? How does your inner critic affect your relationships? How does your inner critic influence perfectionism? Okay, this is all about you getting to know you. So this is a big deal. This has nothing to do with anyone else. This is your self-discovery period. And we're going to explore your inner critic. We're going to learn how to explore it in an empathetic way. We're going to create a framework that allows you to identify your core beliefs. Boundaries are always a part of the conversation. We're always talking about how can you be more authentic? How can you honor your yes and your no? And so I really want to encourage you to think about your own experiences. How has your inner critic shaped you? And we're going to get started. It's important for you all to know me. So if you were with us last week, if you have joined any of the other collaborative opportunities that I have with Dr. Jada, you might remember that I shared a little bit about my journey. So as a clinical mental health therapist, this is my second career. I spent over a decade in leadership in GME at Morehouse School of Medicine. And I transitioned to this work because it became clear to me that we didn't have a sustainable way to support our Black docs and they were burning out. And that was a big deal for me. So this work is deeply personal to me. And I want you to leave feeling more unapologetic about caring for yourself. In my private practice, I very much focus on workplace wellness. I want to help to make work suck less. We spend a lot of time at work. I want it to be fulfilling. And I support people leaders. I support industry influencers. I support passionate achievers who are committed to making the world a better place. And so they need more support. And so it always makes sense for me to come into this space, into the Real community, because you are my client. And this space is about you. Dr. Jada has made it clear that she wants this space to be about you. And so I'm here to create space for you to uncover deeper insights about yourself. So remember, this conversation is all about you. Okay. And so I want you to talk to me about who you are. You guys can drop it in the chat while I go over some housekeeping rules. I want you to tell me where you're joining from. I want to know the last thing that brought you joy. I'm always going to begin with the end in mind. The answer to depression is connection, you all. So when we have an opportunity to connect, it's important that we take it. When we have lived very fast-paced lives, it's important for us to slow it down, for us to connect with joy. I'm going to talk to you all about what housekeeping would look like in this space. First, it's always really important for me to create a comfortable space for you. And so I want you to get settled. I don't know if you have been able to kind of take a deep breath and make certain that you are taking off one hat so that you can settle into this good work that we're getting ready to do. But I want you to grab your journal. I want you to have some type of pen or paper so you can jot down your thoughts, reflections as we do this intensive deep dive. I want you to grab your tea, your water. I have ginger tea because my stomach was feeling a little, and I wanted to be present for you all. I want you to make sure that you are doing what you need to do so that you can feel comfortable, so that we can enhance this experience. If you are a person that has difficulty sitting, which is a thing for high performers, I want you to be okay with grabbing something to ground you, something textured, a fidget spinner, a stress ball, even a pen does it, something that brings you back to present so that you can focus. I want you to be okay, camera off, camera on. I want you to feel free using the chat box because I am a social person. I'm an extreme extrovert. So the fact that I'm talking to you all through here, when I see you engaged in the chat, it gives me life. So I want you all to feel comfortable communing with each other and also communing with me. And I want you to remember that it's okay to take breaks. Okay. Like your well-being is important. So please take care of yourself. If you happen to need closed captioning, I want to make certain that you know that that will be available too, if not now in the replay. Okay. And we're going to jump into it. So as we begin our exploration of perfectionism, this is a place that I love to be because I work with achievers. Okay. And I want us to pause and connect with the common belief that many of us hold. And so this conversation that we're having about perfectionism is often seen as striving for flawlessness and setting excessively high standards for ourselves, often with impossible timelines to create these, to complete these excessively high standards for ourselves. And so as a therapist, when we begin to peel back the layers, we're asking ourselves, why do I carry this belief? Why is this so important to me? And I'm genuinely curious, right? I want to know what has shaped this relentless pursuit of perfection. And usually it's the story behind the relentless pursuit that has contributed to this mindset, right? So I want you to think about the forces at play here, whether they're from our upbringing, our environment, or if it is our own internal battle. I want you to consider and not judge, right? We're not fixing it yet. We're just gaining insight and awareness into how this inner critic shapes our life, how perfectionism shows up in our world so that we can better engage with it. Okay. Because if there is perfectionism, then there is an inner critic. And I want you to think about your inner critic. Behind our drive for perfection often lurks a persistent inner critic, right? So this critic isn't just there to make life difficult, it's trying to protect us. And this is a big conversation when we talk about adaptation and integration. I want you to think about why you have this inner critic. I want you to think about your inner critic as a protective parent, as a supportive teacher, as a watchful best friend. This person is shielding us from judgment, from shame, from hurt. It's a mechanism that wants to keep us safe. Okay. So when we think about the protective nature of perfectionism, in many ways, perfectionism has served as a survival strategy for you. Okay. So for some, I would imagine that expressing yourself may have felt like taking a risk. And so the critic steps in to help you avoid potential pitfalls. It's essential to acknowledge the function of the internal critic so that we can have an opportunity to question if we still need the inner critic to be so aggressive. Okay. And so as we shift towards authenticity, we're asking, is there a more adaptive way to honor our true self? So we have this inner critic. We want to make sure that we're carving space for genuine self-expression. So when I'm showing up in space, is it my authentic self showing up in space? Where authenticity takes precedence over this impossible standard of perfection, that's when we're honoring our yes and our no. That's when we are allowing ourselves to show up in the fullness of ourselves. And so I want you to consider exploring these questions. I want to think about how we can embrace authenticity and align how we engage in the world with our values. Okay. We can't do this if we're not considering self compassion. So when I say self compassion, I am talking kindness to self. Self compassion at its core involves being warm and understanding towards yourself, especially when we are in the midst of suffering or failure or feeling inadequate. So instead of pushing away the pain and trying to pretend like it doesn't exist, what we're doing is we're going to examine it differently. Kristin Neff, Dr. Neff, does a really good job of explaining self-compassion. So if you're looking for a resource who really makes it tangible and easily digestible, she does a great job. And she breaks it into 3 key components. We start with self-kindness. Self-kindness is very much about extending kindness to ourselves. It's about being our own best friend and understanding ourselves differently. So it's an invitation to soften our inner dialogue and offer ourselves grace through the very difficult times, because life is tough and we're not asking life to do anything differently, because life is here to teach us. What we want to do is we want to interact with the hard differently. And so within that space, when you are going through something hard, it often feels like you're alone. So Dr. Neff says, hey, we need to consider common humanity. Sometimes we feel isolated in our suffering, but recognizing that personal inadequacy and struggles are just a part of the shared experience, it helps us to see that we're not alone. And loneliness is an epidemic. And so I want us to consider a perspective that fosters connection, that fosters empathy, and that reminds us that suffering is something that everyone experiences, right? Stress is a part of life. And if we can look to the right and left of us and acknowledge that everyone is going through their own personal stressful situation, then it doesn't feel like we're alone. And within that space, it means that we're training our brain to be in the here and now. So there's a mindfulness component that we have to consider. Mindfulness sometimes get a bad rap in pop psychology. So there is like a religious aspect that's also brought in, that's usually brought into it, or a spiritual aspect. What mindfulness is simply holding your thoughts and feelings in balanced awareness. So it is, I am training my brain to be here. I mentioned to you all last week that the research supports that your brain is only here in the present moment 5% of the time. Your brain is usually in the future thinking about what it has to do, or it's in the past thinking about what it didn't do. Right. And so what we want to do is, rather than over identifying with negative emotions, we want to allow our dominant self view to be compassionate. We want to allow mindfulness to help us observe without judgment. So you are the thinker, you are not your thoughts. And so within that, we are creating more space for a compassionate response. Okay. And so when we move forward, what I'm asking you to consider is, how do we integrate self-kindness, common humanity, mindfulness into our everyday life? I want you to ask, how can I be kinder to myself? How can I be kinder to myself? It's a very simple, reflective question. When your inner voice, your inner critic gets loud, I want you to pause and I want you to say, oh, how can I be kinder to myself in this moment? What can I offer to myself? Because that voice of perfectionism is loud. And depending on what she wants, she, he, they want you to understand, it becomes all encompassing. Okay. And so I want you to take a moment to imagine the voice of perfectionism. Imagine your voice of perfectionism. What does it sound like? Is it loud? Is it persistent? Is it subtle? Is it whispering in the background? Self-awareness is the first step. So transitioning from knowing to doing is what takes time. It takes effort and it takes intentionality. So I'm going to give you some things that come up in therapy often for me. Okay. As a therapist, I follow the feeling. I do not follow blame. So instead of asking what's wrong with you, I am asking what happened to you. I want to know about your origin story. There are some voices of perfectionism that I hear in this work, whether I am doing an individual session, a coaching session, whether I am doing workplace wellness, it is here. Okay. And so I want you to explore what might have been going on in your family of origin that led you to become self critical. That first family is really important. That first family teaches you how to love, how to trust, how to connect, what's important. And if you are afraid of being perceived as a problem, as being perceived as the squeaky wheel, then you would have learned some things. Perhaps you had parents or loved ones that were highly critical, and you learned that it was safer to fly under the radar, to go unnoticed. Maybe standing out felt dangerous to you, so you felt that it was safer to blend in. Maybe you have learned to just go along to get along. Oftentimes with clients, they were praised for showing promise very early on, like they got that gold star. And so it made them feel like they had no room to stumble or fumble. And as adults, what shows up is it makes them need validation, seek affirmation, and that becomes a part of their worthiness. And so if they can't get these tangible accomplishments, then it makes them feel like they are perpetually failing. And it challenges this deeply rooted belief that they are unworthy. And so once we become aware of this origin, we can decide if this is the best approach, right? So I hear you're not working hard enough. And so you begin to strive endlessly without a break, no breaks. It is amazing. It is fascinating to me how many of us power through without a break. And this is our baseline. You don't deserve to be here. Imposter syndrome shows up in this space. And, I have thoughts about imposter syndrome. I've talked to Dr. Jada on other platforms about imposter syndrome because it often shows up as like this blame the victim kind of conversation where it attributes blame to the injured party. And sometimes that social system is so invalidating that you should feel like an imposter. But that's another story for another day. What happens is when you don't feel like you deserve to be here, it undermines your presence, your ability. When we feel like we're not good enough, it means we're constantly questioning our self-worth. When you feel you are not acceptable as you are, it means that you feel like you have to shapeshift. You are always needing to change to make everyone around you, everyone in the room feel more comfortable. You have to hide parts of yourself, which means that you're not connected to authenticity. And oftentimes you feel like you have to silence parts of yourself, which teaches that you should suppress your inner voice and desires in order to be acceptable. Okay. And so there's a conversation that I want us to consider where we're meeting our inner critic with the inner nurturing. And this is the inner nurturer. And this is a big deal in this work. So as a trauma therapist, we're always considering what part of your world has felt unbearable and intolerable. And I want you to consider the role that the inner critic has played in your life. What purpose does it serve? What value does it add? Okay. And so when you think about, I'm going to meet my inner critic with my inner nurturer, I want you to reflect, is your inner critic a source of encouragement? Okay. Does your inner critic actively celebrate your achievements? Like, is she like the cheering best friend? Is she like the supportive teacher? Like, what is she saying to you? Is your inner critic kind and instructive? Or does the inner critic come across as impatient and irritable? Does the inner critic help? And so I want you to be able to think honestly which approach truly supports your growth. So if your inner critic is coming through aggressive, is that helpful for you? Is it sustainable for your development, for your evolution? What is it doing for you now? Is it adding value to your life today? Okay. And so I want you to think about your inner critic versus your inner guiding. Okay. So what do we need to do? What is important? I want you to hold that critic with caring compassion. And I know that's difficult, especially in my world, because we don't really have time for all of these feelings. And so when I say your inner critic is showing up and they are dominating the conversation, and what would it mean to pause for a second and say, what do you need? How can I support? You're doing a good job. That feels almost like coddling. But what the research support is exactly what we need. Okay. And so remember, it's important to hold that inner critic with compassion. What would it mean to preserve the core function of the inner critic, which is to protect you from essentially this worst version of yourself? Because that's what the inner critic is here to do. You say you don't want to be lazy, and guess what? The inner critic is going to be like, okay, absolutely. So let me tell you all of the reasons why you cannot do this so you won't be lazy. Or let me tell you all of the reasons, all of the things that you have not done that is perpetuating this lazy phenomenon. That person, that inner critic, that voice is essentially saying, I don't want you to feel this way. And so this is what I need for you to know so that we can do better. And what I'm saying is it possible that we can have the function of the inner critic without all of the harshness, without the meanness, without the punishment, and without the shame? What might that look like? So again, we're imagining the voice of perfectionism. We're thinking, how does the voice of perfectionism sound? And we're saying, can we give this voice a softer, more empathetic and compassionate frame so that it doesn't feel so aggressive? Okay. How is that landing for you all? What's coming up? So, what are we talking about? We are talking about understanding and managing this inner critic. And if you are a high performer, most of the time, my achievers have always been achievers. As early as first grade, they were like, oh, I'm going to be in this spelling bee. I'm going to get all of these words correct. I am going to pack my lunch. I am packing my backpack. I am getting ready to go and take over the world. This is an early understanding of what it means to be perfect. And as we move from perfection to progression, then we're also understanding that this has been happening for a while. So to consider a new perspective will also take a while. And how do we do that? First, we want to always begin every conversation with curiosity, right? Not judging, not fixing. We are just getting very curious. I love exploring the concept of the inner critic because how it influences our decision making is a big deal. I see it in executive coaching. I see it when we are doing process planning and strategy planning in organizations. That inner critic will stifle you at the table. And so in my work with high performers, my clients have noted that it often feels that this inner critic affects every choice they make, and that often it becomes problematic when that critical voice becomes toxic, right? So the toxicity can significantly hinder the client's ability to tap into that personal growth and development, leading to a loss of self-identity. Okay, I want you to tell me if you hear yourself in the loss of self identity. So, when your sense of self is tied to how much you can do for others, when your sense of self is tied to the number of likes you have on socials, when your ability to feel good about yourself is very much wrapped up in the accolades you receive, like what does that feel when you are not receiving the praise? I want you to think about, depending on your age, are you married? Do you have kids? Are you professionally successful? And if you are not checking these boxes, how do you truly feel about yourself? Like, what happens if you are not doing what is socially acceptable? Like, what does that do to you? How does it make you feel? How does it affect your behavior patterns? Because what we traditionally would do with this inner critic when we're trying to manage it is it's like a hostile takeover. We're like, nope, we are eliminating this internal voice. We are ignoring it. It does not exist. What the research support, what science is saying is that's not sustainable. And so now we know that it's more effective for us to have a conversation with this inner critic, to acknowledge that that inner critic is there, because remember, the inner critic's evolutionary function is to protect you from harm. And so if we consider getting to know the voice better, then we can befriend it. We can emphasize that we understand that the inner critic is trying to help us. And we can think about if there's a better way for us to discover more integrated ways to get through hard moments. And so what do I want you to do? I want you to first understand the inner critic's impact. I want you to be able to acknowledge when the voice turns critical. What is the inner critic asking of you? How do you lead with curiosity? How do you understand the function of the inner critic? Right? So initially, the inner critic might have developed to protect you. Right. So at first, it's like, oh no, you're not going to mess with my person. And so let me tell you what I'm going to do. Now, over time, you have become more resourceful. You have grown. And so that protection may not be needed in the same way. And so our job is to work collaboratively with this inner critic. And we are trying to ease the angst that shows up when it potentially feels like you're going to be threatened so that we can find a more functional way to move through problem solving. Right. And so first, I want you to consider what is the function of the inner critic? What value does it add to your life? Because it has added value. That's why it's still there. What is it asking of you? What does it need? Does it need you to pay attention? Right? Does it need you to acknowledge that there is a very steep hill that you're getting ready to climb? And right now it feels like you're pushing a boulder up the hill all by yourself. Does it need support? Does it need help? Why is the inner critic so loud? I also want you to be able to address the fears of the inner critic. I lean into fear. Fear is a insight, a data point. Fear is asking us to pause for a second. It's asking us to assess. It's asking us, what do we need? And so I want you to be able to say, why is my inner critic here? If I'm going into an invalidating social environment and imposter syndrome or phenomenon is online, then your inner critic should be there because it feels like there's a threat and that threat is probably real. What we're saying to the inner critic is, yeah, but I can handle this threat. Right. So I'm not in elementary school. I'm not in high school. I'm not in my first job. I'm a seasoned professional. I've been doing this. I have resources. This isn't my first rodeo. And so we're having a collaborative conversation so that first we can recognize why it's trying to protect us and the origin of that protection. And eventually we're easing the fear so that we can have a more constructive dialogue. Okay. I want to introduce you to a few people. I want you to meet Monica. Monica, we love Monica. Monica is the recovering people-pleasing perfectionist. Okay. So on the journey to self-discovery, it is very, very crucial for us to take a step back and not identify wholly with the inner critic, but we want to make certain that we're clear that she came from somewhere. Okay, so let's talk Monica. Monica battles with a severe inner critic, preventing her from developing a strong sense of self. Although she is intelligent and successful, she often believes that she should feel happier, but instead, she is frequently overcome with loneliness and dread. Now she's in her 50s. Monica struggles to identify what she truly wants or needs, and making decisions is a challenge for her. Now, I'm a therapist, and so I'm not like, what's wrong with Monica? She's super successful and she's intelligent. She should know that she is a powerful force in this world. I'm saying, what has happened in Monica's world? What is her lived experience informing? Well, what we know is that there's a struggle for identity. Monica's childhood was dominated by her well-meaning, her mother loved her, but controlling mother who stifled her attempt at self-expression and identity formation, right? And so because of her family dynamics, she had a father that was critical and her brothers taunted her, and it contributed to Monica's repeated abandonment of her own self. So now when she's at the table, she feels less likely or less empowered to say the thing because the impact of the echoes of criticism that still show up for Monica are here. And if we don't name these things, then Monica can't be aware that this is contributing to her second guessing herself. Right. And so when we're adapting for acceptance, we are asking ourselves, now, what is the cost of people pleasing? So Monica has mastered the art of mirroring others' desires at the expense of her own identity. So she's meeting the external expectation, but she is sacrificing herself in the meantime. And so her journey to self-discovery is very much breaking free from these past patterns. She has excelled. She is academically inclined. She is at a crossroad right now, and she is trying to figure out, how does she tap into herself? How does she allow creativity to show up in her work? How does she become more self-aware? How does she become more independent? Okay. Does any part of Monica's story resonate with you? I want you all to know that when we're working with the struggle of adapting the inner critic, we have to understand the brain's inner critic. Like, why does the brain do what it does? And so I'm going to introduce you to the SAM process. Okay. SAM is a big deal for me because your brain is always scanning, it's always on high alert, and it's always motivating, right? So it is trying its very best, to make certain that it has evolved over the years. So the nature of the inner critic often feels overpowering and it can be overbearing. But what I want you all to take away is that it's always there to protect us. It's well meaning because it's trying to protect us. And so in this work, we call this the checker. So I want you to consider your inner critic to be the checker. Okay. The checker and the inner critic the inner critic is a manifestation of the checker. So it can become overly demanding or critical, but really it's trying to figure out what around you might be unsafe. Okay. So remember, the inner critic is a manifestation of the checker. Your brain is hardwired to protect you. That's why the brain is here. So it's scanning all of the sensory information that's coming in and it's trying to figure out what is unsafe. Okay, so the SAM process tells us a few things. It says we're going to scan, we're going to alert, we're going to motivate. And so I want you to think about what we need to do in this process. How do we work with anyone that's struggling with their inner critic? First, we are acknowledging that there is a survival component that exists in this conversation. In evolutionary terms, the checker is a vital part of our survival mechanism. So it operates through the scan, alert, motivate. And this is how historically animals have detected and responded to danger. Right. And so I want you to think about, like, in training and trauma therapy, they always give us this image of like this animal approaching a watering hole and it's scanning for predators like mountain lions. And even if you don't see the mountain lion, it's like the animal can detect it. It's always motivated by the caution. It's always looking around. It's hyper vigilant. This checker exists in us. And so what we have to do is we have to consider a different and more adaptive way to maneuver the checker. Okay, so your checker is what is the predominant function of this inner critic. Okay, so think of your checker, think of your inner critic. Think scan for dangers, it alerts to threats, and then it's trying to figure out what needs to happen. So that's the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? So then what do I need to do? Do I need to run? Do I need to hide? Do I need to wait? And if we're aware that when our inner critic comes online, that our stress has been peaked and we can pause for a second, then it will allow us to negotiate differently with the inner critic. So, what does that mean? First, I want you to become more aware. Self-awareness is the first step to change. Okay. I want you to realize how much your inner critic impacts your life. How can we do that as soon as we close out this conversation? What we can do is we can just get curious. When I am in my everyday experience, I'm having conversations with my loved ones, I'm at work, I'm talking to my kids, I'm talking to my friends, I'm at the grocery store. How vocal is the inner critic? What is the inner critic saying to you? And then I want you to allow the inner critic to express itself. If the inner critic is saying you need to do more, is it true? Right? One of the ways that I work with my clients to integrate all that they do is if you are not certain that you are moving through life with intentionality, I want you to stop for a second and I want you to write down everything you did from the moment you woke up in the morning. Big, small, personal, professionally, it doesn't matter. Write it down. Every single thing that you did. I would imagine that you're not as lazy and unproductive as you think. And then I want you to engage. I want you to engage your inner critic. I want you to ask, what does it need? What does it want you to understand? What do we need to recognize about its intentions? How is it trying to keep you safe from being ineffective, being perceived as incompetent? What is it trying to do? And then we want to negotiate with this very, very, very compelling argument that the inner critic is going to give you. We want to reduce the control. So we don't want to over identify with the negativity bias that the inner critic is going to give you. But we also want to acknowledge and thank and honor the inner critic for being protective over you. Both are true. Okay, so we're going to negotiate a little bit with the inner critic so that we can feel powerful in this conversation. And we do that by not over identifying with negativity bias. Okay, I want to introduce you to the voice in your head telling you not what you are, but what you are most afraid of being. I want you to remember this. The inner critic has a function. It is the voice in your head. It is telling you not what you are, but what you are most afraid of being. If I don't want to be unsuccessful, the inner critic is going to be like, this is how we make certain we don't do that. We just have to make certain that the inner critic is not so harsh, that it's not so demeaning, that it does not perpetuate and lead to anxiety and avoidance. Okay, so that's the integrated piece. I'm going to close us out, but I want you guys to meet Stephanie. Stephanie is important to me. Okay, I am very familiar with Stephanie in my practice. Okay, so Stephanie is an intelligent and successful professional. She grapples with obsessive thinking. Rumination is where Stephanie lives. She is persistently haunted by the belief that any wrong decision will label her as incompetent or ineffective. Despite her many accomplishments, a relentless inner critic torments her, constantly reminding her to do more, try harder, stay focused whenever she perceives she's made a mistake or fallen short of expectations. What do we need to know about Stephanie? Remember, I want you to put your therapist hat on. We're not saying what's wrong with Stephanie. We are saying what happened to Stephanie. What has influenced this behavior? Well, her family of origin. Stephanie grew up in a family where she felt unseen, unheard, unsupported. Her family frequently criticized others. They didn't criticize Stephanie. Like Stephanie was doing her thing, but because they labeled others as irresponsible, as lazy, as not trying hard enough, this ingrained in Stephanie a deep fear of being perceived as unintelligent despite her academic and professional accomplishments. Okay. And so what needs to happen with Stephanie? First, we have to help Stephanie become more aware of her inner critic and its roots, right? And so Stephanie often hears her inner critic branding her as lazy and unmotivated or not hardworking, right? And because her family environment, her first family helped to encourage that laziness was unacceptable. Now we have to help her to create an accurate reflection of her worth, not based on anyone else. And so we need to guide Stephanie in reframing that criticism. We need to appreciate her inner critic's intention, right? We're not trying to silence the inner critic, but we're also saying, hey, Steph, let's talk about you. Let's talk about what you've done. Let's talk about who you are. Let's talk about how intentional you are, how determined you are. Let's talk about your resilient story. Let's talk about all that you've accomplished so that we do not over-identify with this self-fulfilling prophecy that she is going to fail, that the other shoe is going to drop. And so what we need to do is recontextualize the origins of this inner critic so that Stephanie can regain confidence in her decision-making skills. Okay. Does Stephanie sound familiar? Because Stephanie is very familiar to me. I talk to Stephanie. I know her. I see her in so many of the clients that I support. And it's important that Stephanie does not feel bullied by her inner critic. It's important that Stephanie takes her power back. How do we shift Stephanie from critic to coach? Right. So we change this narrative by reframing her self-monitoring habits. We start with awareness and then we go to validation. Based on Steph's story, her inner critic actually served as a protective function. It kept her in good standing with her family, connected with her family. And this voice reflects an evolutionary trait that many of us share. We have to survive. We have to be accepted. Humans need to be accepted. And so by recognizing this, Stephanie can start to see her inner critic, not just something negative, but as a kind of hardwired checker looking out for her. Okay. So Where do I want you to move? I want you to move from critic to coach. I want you to know and understand that there is a life where you wake up every day feeling fulfilled, where you are intrinsically motivated, where your actions resonate with your values and you feel authentically aligned. I'm holding this for you all. I am holding that we are brave enough and we have enough courage to move towards this awareness. And so we're asking first, does any of this sound familiar? So I'm walking through my clients. I'm saying, hey, does this sound familiar to you? Have you ever felt this unrelenting pressure, like you're constantly running to avoid failure or shame? It often feels like there's never enough time. There's often a conversation that you're having in your head that you're always dropping the ball, right? When we talk from a psychotherapy perspective, being driven often means there's a tension and pressure to fuel our motivation. So, what might it feel like to shift from being driven to being fulfilled? Right. So fulfillment is about expressing yourself. It's about using all of your talents in a positive way to help support your continued evolution. And so we're talking about intrinsic motivation, right? So we're exploring a new dimension of motivation. Typically, we focus on avoiding the negatives. I'm saying that doesn't work, you all. What I want us to do instead is I want us to embrace getting it right. I want you to embrace what adds joy to your life. I want you to shift toward an intrinsic motivation that is engaging, where you do activities that hold meaning, where you're aligning your values with what brings joy, where your passion is driving your purpose. Okay. I want to introduce you all to Maslow's motivation distinction. You all may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, but I also want you to know he was very clear about deficiencies, right? So the D needs are driven by what we lack. And that's where negativity bias lies. I want us to be able to shift to the B needs. I want us to focus on achieving self-actualization, what fulfills our potential. So when we move from D to B, we are changing lanes from survival mode to thriving. Okay. So where do we go from here? I want you to be able to clarify what drives you. I want you to ask yourself, am I motivated by fear? Am I avoiding failure? Am I able to find power in what I truly enjoy? I want you to be able to shift your attention to activities that truly satisfy you. How do you know? Energetically. When you say yes, do you feel aligned? Do you feel good in your yes? Do you feel satisfied in your no? I want you to think about what you have agreed to personally and professionally. And I want you to ask yourself, does it feel good? Do you feel good about it? And then I want you to be able to embrace that we are all human. We are all trying to figure this thing out. Nobody has it all together. And so it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to focus on progress rather than perfection. It's okay to allow your passion to inform your purpose and to connect to clarity. I want you to know that striving for these unreachable, perfectionistic goals often hold us back from authentic growth. And I am a recovering people pleasing perfectionist. I am my first client. And so I also want you to be comforted that I'm never going to introduce anything to you that I have not tried and found efficacy in my work. And so, as I close out, I want you to consider moving towards a growth mindset where fulfillment guides us rather than pressure, creating a space for genuine progress and happiness. Okay. We're moving from critic to coach real. And I am so excited to learn more, to hear more, to see what you're doing. I want you all to DM me. I want you to tell me what landed, what didn't. Oftentimes it's a lot of information. And so some of it won't become relevant until it is relevant. So you'll be going through a difficult moment in your life where you're at the crossroads and something I say will land. That's what I want to hear from you. I want to know what's happening in your world and if this is helpful for you. Okay, let me know.
Janae, that was absolutely on point. You did it in 43 minutes. We went from critic to coach. Just dropping in those nuggets. I definitely see Monica and Stephanie in the mirror. I see her in the office. I see her on, in certain circles. I will tell you, Monica and Stephanie, bless their hearts, as they say, are moving from critic to coach. I love the way you framed this in a very strength oriented way, so that to some extent I felt like you almost kind of gave Monica and Stephanie a place
Yeah.
to just be as they are, and to make a choice of, is this still serving me, or can I stand to make some changes that feel better, that give me better results in life, and
Sure.
moving towards that, from that little girl to the adult that can decide. I absolutely, I know if you did not catch this live and you are watching the replay, you're going to have to pause, you're going to have to write, journal, get the questions, really use this as a tool. This is not just for entertainment, this is not just for your listening pleasure. I hope that you will use this as a tool, a resource to help sort through some of the experiences that you may be struggling with, that you're ready to get rid of. So for some of us, it is, you said the first step is self awareness and being able to go into expression, and then to go through those steps and it takes time.
It takes time, Dr. Jada. I want, it's very important for us to be clear that mental wellness requires active engagement. And without intentionality, you are likely going to slide right back into those unwanted behavior patterns, because when stressed, your brain is going back. It's saying, what have I always done? So unless we're in this work consistently trying to renegotiate and unlearn these unhelpful behavior patterns, we always go back. Because one of the feelings that is it's we can all kind of land here is this feeling of being stuck, where we're looking for answers and we can't really find a viable one. And I want the real community to know, I say it a lot when I'm working with clients, stuck is a freeze response, stuck is rumination, stuck is doom scrolling, stuck is when you keep replaying the conversation that didn't go well in your head over and over and over again. These are very important moments of self-awareness that will allow us to know, like, oh, what Janae was saying is here now. Like, this is what she is saying, and I want you to be able to understand how it presents in your real world.
Yeah. I think you have definitely set the stage. I think you have created a pathway to self awareness and to observation, if nothing else. Before you can be aware, sometimes you have to observe and just take a moment to look at what is so in your life.
Yes.
And I hope that this conversation tonight has done that. I hope that this has opened some pathways for you, given some food for thought. Maybe you had an aha moment. Maybe some of this didn't really feel that good. Maybe it was kind of a little bit too much in your face, but that's okay. Take some time to process it. You can come back to this. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yes.
You get to take your time to process through this, and
Absolutely.
sometimes we just need that extra support. Sometimes I was talking with a client earlier. You can't be the player and the coach at the
Oh,
same time. It's they in two different places. The player is playing and the coach is coaching.
so huge, Jada. I tell that to medical students. I tell that to residents. I say that to first year attendings. Like, you have to be a student of this thing first before you can be the teacher. Like, it's okay to not be in the driver's seat all the time, right?
Yes, that is a good one, especially for, again, high achievers. It's
Yes.
there's no space, there's no room for inadequacies and insecurities and all of those things. You just have to talk yourself off the ledge, keep going, keep powering through, keep putting up the facade, and really being in performance mode. And I love what you said of how rich it is to get closer and closer and to that authentic self. It's just so much easier.
Yeah.
Just giving permission and validation that my authentic self is good enough. So I'm gonna show up like that, try that out for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think there's so much for people to gain. Is there anything that you want to share as we close out tonight? It's so rich. I don't, there's, if you don't say anything else, we have
Yeah.
said enough, I think, for some breakthroughs and some ahas. Anything else you would like to share?
I think I just want to just consistently lift you up, Dr. Jada. Like, I appreciate you offering this space to the people who trust you. When I am talking about weight loss or diet culture or insecurities, there is an origin to that. And I just appreciate you recognizing that there's more to the conversation and you expanding the community so that we can collectively come to these things together. I believe in connection. I believe in community. And I don't know. I'm so impressed, Dr. J. I'm so impressed. So just keep going, keep doing it. And I'll be a part of it. I'll be here with you.
Awesome. Of course, we're linked now. We're together. We go together. So y'all, those who are looking at sorting out your life now, in the new year, some new awarenesses, some new expressions, some new engagement, and all the things that you deserve. Honestly, that you deserve. It's never too late. It's never too early, and you don't have to wait until you're in crisis.
Mhm.
So we talk about that a lot. If you're looking to just be even better, you're good now, and you're looking to just really solidify some things. I know many of you have been on a healing journey. It seems like since COVID, a lot of realizations have come forward, and decompensation, and people that are in recovery from things. So definitely we invite you to join us again on January 8th. We're going to give you Christmas off, and we're going to give you New Year's Day off. So the next time we see you, it will be 2025, January 8th, 2025. And this one is going to be juicy. So I want you to mark your calendars, share with your friends. For those of you who are getting email notifications, make sure you feel free to share those, because the more robust, the more we're in community and connection, the more we heal collectively. So you want to be a part of this. Um, we're going to take some new insights into 2025, and January 8th, you're going to get the blueprint. So see us on January 8th. Have a wonderful holiday. We wish you well. Refer back to these during the holidays. If you're in community that is trying you a little bit, come back to these. Put
Please
your
do.
headphones in. Use these tools. You have new tools that can be used on demand now. So give us some comments for those of you who are watching the replay. Feel free to give us some comments in YouTube as well as Facebook. Girl, get ready. We thank you for showing up. We thank you for being there, and stay tuned, because the Wellness Summit is coming January 31st and February 1st. So you'll get to see Janae again. And we have such a robust summit coming. Stay tuned, look at your emails, continue to check the group, because we'll be putting information out about that. I'm going to let you go on this Wednesday. Bliss and blessings to you. Startwithreal.com if you want to schedule an appointment with Janae, you want to schedule an appointment with Real, you're ready to address your health and wellness and well-being. Startwithreal.com. We're happy to get you started. Bye for now.
See ya.